For thousands of years, humans have relied on walls to keep them safe. Of wood, stone, concrete. But in a zombie apocalypse, the best we seem to manage is piled furniture, boarded windows, and the occasional chain link fence. So I have to ask, where are the castles? Hey, it's Max. Am I the only one bothered by the lack of serious defenses when it comes to zombie media? Now, I understand that in plenty of zombie survival scenarios, we're following survivors in the literal hours or days after an outbreak, and it's understandable that most people will be scrambling just to find somewhere safe for the immediate future. But plenty of zombie media takes place months or even years after the initial outbreak. The Last of Us is literally set 20 years later, and yet we still see the majority of the survivors living in the ruins of pre-zombie construction. I don't get it. Did the zombies eat all of the bags of concrete at the local hardware store? Why are there any windows on the bottom stories of these inhabited buildings? These should have been not just boarded up, but entirely filled in long ago. Not to mention that, in addition to the threat of zombie hordes, the collapse of broader civilization also leads to hostile bands of survivors as well. Raiders, bandits, people who will actually scrutinize your position and take advantage of any weakness. Why aren't people making an effort to prepare their best possible defenses? In the TV adaptation of The Last of Us, we see a character, Frank, a survivalist prepper who is given what we could almost say is an ideal scenario given the circumstances. He is given free reign of his entire town for days, possibly weeks, to prepare any defenses he wants. And what does he do? He sets up an electric fence and some pit traps. I mean, it's better than nothing, I suppose, but the electric fence is powered by a large and noisy generator, which is likely to draw in both zombies and raiders. Not to mention, his house seems to be left largely unfortified. Again, are those accessible ground floor windows I'm looking at? And we know he has access to both gas and tractors, but he couldn't be bothered to dig himself a ditch, moat, or some other kind of earthwork barrier? If another hostile survivor came by, they could just sit at the tree line with a rifle until Frank walked by the window, shot him, and then helped themselves to all of his stuff. In contrast, we have a more fortified scenario, the prison from The Walking Dead. I'll give the survivors credit here because, even though they did not construct these fortifications, they at least had the sense to make use of them. And what a defensive position! Aside from the zombified inmates present at the time of their arrival, the prison proved to be incredibly secure, and the narrative needed to throw a literal tank at the survivors just to force them out of such a desirable position, which is something essentially no survivors would have access to anyways. I'll commend 28 years later, where we see an English village that has survived for decades on the island of Lindisfarne. Although its erected defenses are pathetic for being set nearly 3 decades after the initial outbreak, the village really doesn't need to worry, as the village is only accessible by a small land bridge that is submerged on a daily basis, and the zombies prefer to avoid water unless they're actively chasing prey. This is a situation where a community is so well situated, it almost entirely makes up for any shortcomings in their own security measures. Now let's turn back to the original Last of Us game. That is, again, 20 years after the initial outbreak. Joel and Ellie travel to Jackson, Wyoming, to see Joel's brother Tommy. Jackson is a functioning community, and based on what we can see from the enclosed area within the walls, there is likely to be at least several hundred people in residence. You could fit more, but based on the population density we actually see, the place doesn't seem too crowded. To be fair to the locals, they have made an effort to fortify, although the defenses we see are very poorly implemented. They built walls at least, but these are still under construction at the end of the first game. although we know from the second game, which is set 4 years later, that these are eventually completed. However, why did they expend the time and resources to make these walls so pointlessly tall? The zombies from The Last of Us are not capable of the superhuman feats we see in World War Z, and we don't see them displaying the intelligence to actually attempt scaling a wall. And the gates are similarly huge, which only increases their vulnerability. Small entrances, large enough to fit a single mounted rider at most, would be preferable. And if there were to be some outbreak within Jackson itself, the interior is entirely unfortified. Moreover, if we're in an apocalypse scenario and you're trying to choose a place to build a long-term community that can be safe from both zombies and raiders, why would you choose the lowest point of elevation? You can obviously respond by saying, well, the valley is just where the existing town already was. Of course they're going to make use of existing infrastructure. But your top priority in an apocalypse scenario would obviously be safety, not convenience. These people still have guns, and the raiders also still have guns. We should choose our position taking into account the reality that people are going to be using guns. By way of example, let me show you a little place called Mackinac Island. It was at one time strategically useful for its position at the strait connecting two of North America's Great Lakes, Michigan and Huron. During the War of 1812, British forces were able to capture the American base of Fort Mackinac after firing only a single shot, because the British had occupied an elevation situated directly behind and above the fort, and the American officer in charge realized the hopelessness of fighting the British forces while they were occupying the high ground. And what was the very next thing the British did after taking control of the island? They built a fort on that high ground, because of course you do. Let's take a quick look at this nifty little fort that they built and compare it to Jackson's defenses. First, obviously, its position. It's at the highest point on Mackinac. No matter where you approach from, you're going uphill toward a fortified position that'll be shooting at you. Second, the walls are low, because when you already have the high ground, they don't need to be tall, just tall enough that you can take cover behind them and somebody else can't hop over them. Third, see those protruding stakes? Those are there to prevent anyone from climbing over, even if they did reach the walls without getting shot. Fourth, the blockhouse, which is a detached interior building, can fire over the low walls, allowing for overlapping fields of fire. And even if the fort's outer walls were breached, the blockhouse could still be meaningfully defended. There's a dozen other features that could have been added to this design to improve it, but even as it is, its advantages over Jackson's design are overwhelming. And it's literally just made out of wood and dirt. Sure, you would need to scale the design up somewhat to accommodate Jackson's several hundred survivors, but that wouldn't be too much of a challenge when you already have the manpower available. Of course, the real reason we typically don't see castles or other sensibly fortified positions in zombie media is that it just isn't the story the author wants to tell. Zombie stories are typically about fear and vulnerability, and that story is better told by focusing on a ragtag group constantly on the move rather than by people hunkering down in a secure location. Again, The Walking Dead threw a tank at their survivors just to get them moving again. But what are the best horde-proof locations you've seen in zombie media? And if you were designing your own fortifications, what features would you make sure to include? Let me know down below. And thanks for watching to the end. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe. And let me know if you have any ideas for more videos. I've been really grateful for the support I've gotten here so far, so thank you. And as always, I hope you have a great day.